You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your five-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests. Good to see you, Geoff and Mike.
You too, Kate. You're looking well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
We missed you last week. Or was it last week? I can't remember.
Last week it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
No,
yeah.
the jet lag is fresh, but no, I'm glad to be back. And it's fun. I feel a little bit spoiled that I just get to listen and enjoy the pod instead of having to herd the cats. But I'm back at it.
Right.
I'm ready.
Meow.
Speaking of, we're going to have, a lot to talk about again today. In the strategy suite, we'll be joined by veteran campaigner Marko Dekovic, and we'll talk about Buttongate, the debates this week. And we've got a clipping to help us dive into the MLA salaries. But first, it is our pleasure to welcome the 34th Premier of British Columbia, Gordon Campbell. This is Gordon's second visit, although we didn't have a chance to dive into a longer conversation during the whirlwind BC election. So now we're in another campaign, so we have loads to talk about with him again today. I'm going to just reacquaint everyone in case they've been living under a rock a bit with Gordon's biography. First elected to public office in 1984 as an alderman, and he soon ascended to the mayor's chair in 1986 in a generational election. He was only 38 when elected. He served for 7 years as mayor, and along the way also chaired the regional district and was president of the Union of BC Municipalities. He entered BC politics in 1993 and won the leadership of the then nascent BC Liberal Party. He led them for 18 years, including through 4 election campaigns and three majority governments. He left office in 2011 and went on to become Canada's High Commissioner in the United Kingdom from 2011 to 2016. As Premier, he brought forward the New Era platform in 2001, and later on, he helped bring the 2010 Olympics to Vancouver and Whistler. He brought in Canada's first revenue-neutral carbon tax, forged a new relationship with BC First Nations, and brought forward major capital projects. Of course, there was a spirited debate along the way. Oh, yeah, sorry. He has an Order of BC and an Order of Canada. There's lots more to talk about, but let's just say welcome back to Hotel Pacifico, Gordon.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
So last time we spoke to you was the BC election. Now it's the federal election. I'm curious what you're making of this one. It's sort of a pretty come from behind, interesting scenario. Have you been surprised to see the shift in the polls?
I'm not sure I've been surprised. I'm concerned. I'm concerned that the most important politician in Canada's federal election, where everyone's talking about Canadian and being the independence of Canada, is Donald Trump in the United States. I think everyone's got to think to themselves, what has our government done? Are they better off after 10 years? Will they be better with 10 more years of that, or 4 more years of that, or not? And I think the results of the last 10 years suggest it's time for a significant change in the direction of the federal government. And people seem to have forgotten about the 10 years before, and they're focusing on what Mr. Trump is doing right now. And I don't think that's very healthy for Canada.
So is that concern extend? Because I think one of the things, just thinking back to the fact that you were here during the BC election, it's like we saw a provincial election where the prevailing winds were these sort of federal forces. And now we're seeing a federal election where the prevailing winds have a lot to do with, with the US, frankly. And, are you kind of pointing there to like voters? Are you concerned maybe voters are conflating too much and it's hard in sort of maybe a social media based news environment to zero in on the right topics and the right leaders, or something else?
Well, I think it's an easy excuse to say it's social media. I think it's us. It's each of us. How did the last 10 years go? What were the results we were looking for? Are we better off after this last 10 years or not? And I think we should hold governments to account. I get that different people have different approaches to how they would take things, but we're in a situation where Canada's economy has been failing, where young people are looking at their futures and saying, what is my future? I can't afford a home. I don't anticipate affording a home. And there are cascading impacts of that, where young people say now to themselves, can I afford a family? And those are things that are significant for us, right? I think the federal immigration policy has been a disaster for Canada. It's not that we don't want immigrants. You just can't take as many immigrants as we had when we're facing a healthcare crisis, a housing crisis, a financial crisis. We can't continue to build, we're not building a future. We're building debt, we're building deficits, and we're taking away opportunities from the next generation. And I think one of the great things for me as a Canadian, a young Canadian, I could think about buying a home. When I was half the age of what Mike and Geoff are right now, I could think about buying a home. It was going to be affordable for me, right? It's not half, this would be a third of my age right now. But at any rate, we have to recognize what we're losing as well as what we might be afraid of. I think instead we should be embracing what Canada can do, what Canada has been, and how Canada can build a better future for everyone. And I don't think it's by hiding from the facts. I think it's by confronting the facts, building on our assets, and recognizing that one country should work as one country, not as 14 different jurisdictions, as one country. And this is a little bit of a rant, so I might as well carry on. Just let me just say one last thing.
On interprovincial trade, is that where you're going?
Yes.
Yes, do it.
1992. All the premiers and the prime minister got together and said, boy, we've got to take down these interprovincial trade barriers. 2001, I was elected, and I said, let's take down the interprovincial trade barriers. I couldn't get any take up on that. I finally got, not finally, Ralph Klein agreed with me. We did what we call the Trade, Investment, and Labor Mobility Agreement. We then added Saskatchewan, but that was a step. And so now just think of this, right? Just everyone should just sort of get their heads around this. More than 2 months ago, we were told the world is going to end as we know it because Donald Trump has done X, Y, Z. The premiers all said they should take down interprovincial trade barriers. If it was really as bad as they say, they should have been in their legislatures. They should have taken the trade barriers down, and we would have created a significant cushion for us as we dealt with the unpredictability of President Trump. They still haven't across the board done it. They should have done it. If it's an emergency, when I used to be in school, there's a fire alarm. When the fire alarm went off, it wasn't supposed to sit in the classroom and yell, fire, fire, fire. You were supposed to stand up, get in line, walk outside, and get to safety. That's what the premier should be doing. Get in their legislature, take down those trade barriers. It would add about $200 billion to Canada's economy. I'm not saying it's the be all, but it's a start of cushioning the impacts of a very uncertain world. They should act. They shouldn't talk.
But Trump is there. Isn't that the problem? People are going, okay, well, I'm not sure 51st state is the problem, the solution to the problems you list. And I can agree with most of them. I don't disagree with any of that. And so now a guy who in people's minds, wrongly or rightly, seems a bit Trump-like, that's Pierre Poilievre, is suddenly on the wrong side of a snap discussion that just came out of nowhere. And is there a way for him to overcome that, or is that just his bad luck?
Well, I think there's a way to overcome that. And I think the way you overcome that is remind Canadians of how strong we are, how independent we are, what we can do. I think that both Mr. Carney and Mr. Poilievre are being distracted from what their real agendas are. I think that Poilievre has been very clear on some of the steps he will take. And frankly, Carney's been pretty clear on he's going to adopt most of them. I mean, the conversion of Mark Carney is equivalent to the conversion on the road to Damascus when you look at what his public policy pronouncements have been. So I think they have to talk directly to Canadians. What has the last 10 years meant to you? What is it you would like government to do? Because so far governments are falling on the old tool. We'll tell you how much money we're going to spend. We'll tell you where we're going to spend it. We'll tell you what we're not going to spend. Let's talk about the world that we live in today. We have a world where Canada is so rich in natural resources that we can actually be the independent Canada that we all want to be. Just means we have to change some stuff. We have to get our energy to Asia and to Europe. We have to make sure we free up our natural resources because that creates a stable long-term foundation for our economy, which is critical for people's social health and their social future. We have to accept change. We have a Liberal government saying, we're not going to change the Canada Health Act. Well, really? 32,000 people plus died in 23 and 24 waiting on what we euphemistically call elective surgery and diagnostic wait lists. That is not a healthy healthcare system. We have to take care of people, not institutions. If people go to an emergency ward, they actually would like to meet a doctor, not an administrator. In the town of Lillooet in British Columbia, Geoff, you'll know them. They had a huge disaster that hit them. Their emergency ward has closed 15 times in the last year and a bit. 15 times. What does that mean when they're emergency ward? It's not like living in Vancouver where you can go, if St. Paul's closed their emergency ward, we go to the General. If they close their emergency ward, we go to the Lions Gate. In Lillooet, if they close their emergency ward, they have to drive all the way to Kamloops. And they're only last in line for the Kamloops emergency ward then. The time that we take to give people care matters. And it's showing up in the number of people that are dying on those elective surgery wait lists. We have to be willing to embrace the world as it is, the facts as they are, and then say in good faith, let's try and solve this problem. Let's measure whether or not we're solving it, and let's look at the results. Let's not look at what we wish would happen. Wishful thinking won't get us very far. And I do think that there's a little too much of, well, somehow it's going to change because one person's changed. It's not going to change that way. What are the policies? Where are they taking us? And I personally, you would know that, and so would Mike, but I'm not a big fan of government to just borrow as much as we can and spend as much as we can. I'm for cost benefits, for looking at how things are working, for changing things that don't work. And to remember, governments have only got your money. They don't have their own money. They take money from your pocket, whether it's income tax or sales tax or whatever. Governments don't create economies, people do.
Well, picking up on that, Gord, I would say about a decade ago, up until for 2 or 3 decades, balanced budgets had been an important part of the public discussion. Flowing out of the high deficits of the 80s, governments kind of, reconnected with balanced budgets in the 90s and onwards in your government. But in 2015, Justin Trudeau explicitly campaigned on the fact that he would run a deficit, and
Right.
it was a big difference between him and Tom Mulcair.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, and that led to the Liberals winning the center-left primary, if you will, in that election, and they haven't looked back since. So now we're in a different time. The debt's piled up, both federally and provincially here. How do you see this debate unfolding in the years ahead? Because it's, we went through that period of, some will call it austerity, some will call it belt tightening, and what maybe just good government, but now it's now we're going to be facing the consequences of it.
Well, let me be honest with you here. Well, I've been honest the whole time, but let me be honest again. It's way, way more fun to be popular than to be unpopular. I'm sure Geoff would reflect on that. It's nice
I
when
think you've seen it both ways. You're a bit of an expert in that area too.
Exactly.
You've tried both.
When you're popular, right? When you're doing the stuff you need to do, sometimes it's unpopular because people, I think, respect the fact that you did it. So I was pretty unpopular in 2002 and 3, but I managed to be elected in 2005 and then again in 2009. So I remember my first big term as mayor. We had a time when we tried to get our budgets under control. Everyone has some little thing you can spend on. No one wants you to change it. But right now I'm now been living for 3/4 of a century. I'm not young anymore, right? Government has grown literally every single year of that part of my life, every single year. And it keeps growing, and it doesn't deliver what they claim to be delivering. So I'll just give you one answer. Every politician stands up and says to you that they care about affordable housing. And do you know what governments do? They add cost to housing. No one that I know of in the world thinks that more affordable means higher prices. They think it is lower cost, and in fact that they have more money in their pocket to pay for it. That's how you get an affordability equation happening. But they stand up and they add, for example, this was long before me, Vander Zam's property purchase tax was only one reason for that. It had nothing to do with housing. It had to do with, I want more money in the provincial coffers. That adds about $20,000 to the cost of every new home in Vancouver. We right now in Vancouver, and I can't speak for all of the parts of the province, I apologize for that, but it's about 30% of the costs of all new housing are directly connected to government. So I'm glad when Mr. Carney says, I'm going to get rid of the GST on building costs. I think we should say the same thing on the PST and the GST on building costs in the province. I frankly think we should be getting rid of the property purchase tax. We should stop having development cost charges, which are not used for as they were supposed to be. And they're adding literally tens of thousands of dollars on every housing unit. Now, everyone will, light their hair on fire about that too, because it's easy to get addicted to taxes. It's easy to get addicted to say, I'm just going to tax you more. What we have to say is, what is it you really need? What are the things that are at the top of your list that we should do well? I think a strong economy allows us to build a better education system, a better healthcare system, but I think we have to change healthcare and education. They're fundamental. They're changing. They're living in an old, when we think about the Canada Health Act, really the Canada Health Act is like, it's almost 50 years old. It might be more than 50 years old now. That's old. We should be able to say, what's our world look like? Well, it's a lot older, number one. At least when I was premier, the per capita cost for taking care of people in 85 plus was about $22,000 a year. For someone who was about 30, it was about $2,200 a year. What's the fastest growing age cohort we have? People that are 85 plus. That adds cost to healthcare. And those costs in healthcare mean we don't have them for enriched education for our kids. So I think there's a real generational challenge, and we have to be much more open, frankly, far less political, and look at what are we trying to accomplish and what's the best way to accomplish it, put that in place, and then measure our results. I think that's what we're going to have to do, and we'll have to do it for another 10 to 20 years probably to get back. When Prime Minister Trudeau or candidate Trudeau said he was going to run a deficit, I think that was direct. I think it was good. It was healthy that he said that. He also said it's going to go to $3 billion a year. He also said he was going to pay it back in 3 years. That's the second two never came to fruition. So now we're looking at massive debts federally that won't be paid back until after 2050. And Mike, I'm starting to have to live to be 120 years old to see the results of some of these programs, right? So I'm not expecting to do that. So I'm counting on my kids enjoying the future we build for them.
So the leaders of today who, you're making the case for that a lot of decisions are being deferred into future generations to face a reckoning of it. Where do you see the new leadership that needs to come to address these things? Where's it going to come from? Because a lot of people who are running for politics are invested in the system.
I think one of the really important things we have to do is encourage young people to get involved, and not by giving them pizza and beer, but by saying, what would you do? What do you want to do? What are the consequences? What are we expecting? We have to do everything we can to encourage them to come. I had one young person, I'd given a talk, and a young person comes up to me and says, that was really good. Thank you very much. I was thinking of going into politics, but I don't think I can now. I said, well, why is that? He says, well, I don't think it's really very rewarding. I said, it's the most rewarding thing you will ever do. It may not be the most remunerative, but it is certainly rewarding. It is, I think it's why people run and then they run again. They run again. It's because it's a rewarding opportunity to serve. And it's a bigger gift than we, I think, sometimes give it credit for. But it's important for us to get young people involved. And it's important for those people like me who are now old people to say, hold it, what are we giving the next generation? Because right now, we're not giving them anything. We've taken virtually all we can take from them. And if I was young today, I would be pretty upset with what the political world has delivered to me. It's wrong what we're delivering to them. We should be thinking of them, not just us. We've had a pretty good go of it. And, I think you watch people today and how they may vote. They're pretty comfortable. If you've got a home, if I'd stayed in the first home I bought, do you know how much it would have cost me to keep it? It was $61,000. Do you know what it's worth today? Probably $4.5 million. And boy, am I ticked off I didn't keep that home. But we haven't. We're comfortable. And we have to sort of put aside a little bit of our comfort and say to the next generation, this is about you. What can we do to help you? Where do you want to go?
Guess, I think we can all agree that farmers here in BC have been hard hit by the increasing frequency of severe weather. The wildfires and flooding we've seen in the last 5 years have been devastating. We've talked about the impact on crops before on this pod, but there were also serious concerns for livestock. Because when flooding or wildfires force residents to evacuate, farmers are left trying to figure out how to get hundreds or even thousands of animals, sometimes very large animals, to safety. That's why, earlier this year, the TELUS Agricultural Livestock Response Unit was stationed in Spalumsheen in the North Okanagan. Each trailer is equipped with livestock rescue supplies, including cow and horse halters, sorting and corral panels, and tools. They're ready to go and can be hooked up to any truck with a trailer hitch in the case of an emergency. Because, as the hometown team, TELUS is here for farmers, and TELUS Agriculture and Consumer Goods is focused on boosting food security and supporting this critical industry here in Canada and across 60 countries around the world. They're doing it with farm management software, precision agronomy, traceability, supply chain, and trade promotion management. And they're leveraging these tools to improve efficiencies and profit for farmers and ranchers, agribusiness, and food, beverage, consumer goods, and retail companies. We'll talk more about this next week, but in the meantime, you can learn more by visiting telus.com/agriculture.
No matter who wins the federal election, we're going to see different faces. There's a change, maybe not generational. And I want you to just give us your thoughts a little bit about the Ottawa-BC relationship, where we may have, we'll certainly have an NDP premier hanging by his fingernails with a very narrow win over a resurgent Conservative Party here. So he's got to take account of those politics, and perhaps we'll have a resurgent Liberal with a very strong Conservative movement on the other side of the house from him. What would you recommend to either Trudeau or Carney, or to EB, or to Poilievre? It's Poilievre in Ottawa, to build that relationship. What does it take to have a positive relationship between Ottawa and Victoria, and what should we look for in that? Is it up to us to fight Trump, or is it up to the national government? Just your thoughts, and that would be very interesting.
Well, I think it's up to us to recognize how strong we are as Canadians. We're British Columbians, but we're also Canadians. I mean, when we did the Olympics, we didn't say there are Olympics in BC. We said that we're Canada's. It didn't matter who won. We all celebrated their Canadianness, right? It was Team Canada was truly Team Canada. I think one of the challenges, frankly, Geoff, over the last little while is when Trudeau said we're the first post-national country in the world. I think he undermined some of that. Not some of it, a lot of it. I just got a new passport. My new passport doesn't have any reflection of Canada's history that I think is important. So, I mean, that's one thing. But to go back to sorry for that, for that digression. But your question is this: when I was running for premier, not in 95, 96, but in 99, 2000, I said my first trade mission is going to be to Ottawa. And everyone said, "What's that?" I said, "Well, we have to go to Ottawa." I lived in Ottawa for 5 years. They don't get British Columbia. For them to get us, we have to give them us. We have to tell them. And honestly, I had, I think, very good relationships with the three prime ministers I was with. I said to them in the first meeting I had with each of them, "I'm never going to play politics with you. You're never going to hear what I feel if I'm upset about something in the newspaper. You're going to hear, I'm going to call you and tell you. I'm going to tell you what I think is important for British Columbia, but I get that your job is to be the Prime Minister of Canada, not the Prime Minister of British Columbia." And that worked. I think it worked very well. I can remember talking to Chrétien one about what our top priority was. And he had a priority, and he said, "Oh, I think it should be this." And I said, "Well, Prime Minister, that's not our priority. It's over here." And the Prime Minister looks at me and says, "Oh, Gordon, there are no votes in there." I said, "I know, but it's our top priority." And he did it for us. Right. So you have to constantly go back. My deputy, I don't know how much you did this, Geoff, as chief of staff, but my deputy went back regularly and talked to the head of the Privy Council, made sure they understand what we were trying to do. Our ministers went and did it fairly regularly as well. So we have to recognize that we've got a 3,000-mile trip. We got to make it Ottawa, because their trip back is 30,000 miles. I went to a leadership debate. Not one leadership mentioned British Columbia. They think the West stops in Alberta. It doesn't. It gets to the Pacific. I remember one of the statistics that I heard, there was a poll, 35% of Canadians think that we're a Pacific country. Well, it's a little more than that. We're a Pacific country. We have a huge coast. We have a huge opportunity of the Pacific. We have to take our message. Everyone is inundated with stuff. We have to take the message out. And I think that it's important to do that. And I'm not saying you have to agree. There were times that I did not agree with Mr. Chrétien or Mr. Martin. I told them directly why I didn't agree with it. I told them what I thought was best for British Columbia, and they made their choices. That's the way
The
it has to work.
Picking up on the Pacific, the Asia Pacific Gateway was a big initiative of your term of office. There's a lot of infrastructure built,
Yeah.
South Fraser Perimeter Road, and you name it. Um, but we are Canada's West Coast port, and sometimes the attitudes of urban British Columbians get in the way of exporting resources from other provinces through the West Coast. How would you sell the Asia Pacific Gateway today, um, given the potential it offers to diversify trade from the U.S.?
I'd sell both the Asia Pacific corridor and the European corridor, Energy East, the Northern Gateway project and Energy East in this way. We're in an international competition. We've got tons of talent. Right now, what we're doing is we're putting Connor McDavid, Mitch Marner, and Nate McKinnon on the bench with a game misconduct. We have to be able to put all of our players on the field. We have to get our energy to Asia. We have to get our energy to Europe. Frankly, by not being able to do that, that plays right into Trump's hand. It makes us more dependent on the Americans than we would certainly like to be. He gets about a 70% discount on the energy we send south of the border, and they take all the benefits. We should keep the benefits for Canada. We can do that. And I think one of the challenges for any government, the next government, is to say Canada is one country. We have a national objective. Our Constitution's clear. Where there's a national objective, you can carry on with it. And frankly, that's the only way that we're going to meet the challenge of building faster than we can ever imagine. As long as we think that the way to do this is to negotiate with premiers and all of the indigenous companies and countries and not or communities, and not be able to say this is a national priority. We're going to carry on with this. Let's talk about how we do it. Let's not talk about whether we do it.
So
Well,
until
could I
recent,
just jump on that, Kate, for a
yeah,
second?
sure.
Because I want to now bring it around to another one of your initiatives, because of the increasing the export of energy to Asia, Europe, wherever, brings up the climate debate. You obviously climate was a centerpiece of your second term in office. How how do we get Canadians to square increased emissions from energy production versus, dealing with climate and trying to do all the things you just mentioned? Well, how would you frame it to
You
people?
just did this to make me feel good. We should have a revenue neutral carbon tax if we have any carbon tax at all.
Okay.
It does not escape me that the New Democrats were opposed to the revenue neutral carbon tax, but really liked just the tax. Yeah, I think you stop talking about the environment as soon as you make it just another tax. And I think the fact of the matter is, we would probably be further ahead environmentally if our liquefied natural gas was getting into international marketplaces than we are with what we've done now. It's cost us about $160 billion for virtually no movement of the needle. And I think it was Christian Freeland who said at one point, it doesn't matter if you get rid of all of the emissions from the tar sands, it won't move the needle. What moves the needle is you put cleaner natural gas into the global economy so they don't use coal. And one of the things that we've, I think, missed in North America, Western Europe, etc., is this. Energy is the foundation of everything. You don't get in an elevator without energy. You don't have rapid transit without energy. You don't have your car without energy. You don't have, there's so many things. The world is built on energy. And so the cleaner the energy we can put out to the world, we would get an economic advantage. There would be a reduced emissions. I don't know how much because we have to displace the coal, but coal is 40 to 50% more emissions than natural gas does. It would be a plus for Canada. It would be a plus for us economically. It would reduce our dependence on the United States, and it would allow us to build the kind of quality lifestyle that we want here without looking over our shoulders at someone else. We are in control of our future, but we have to take advantage of all of our assets, not just a couple.
Until recently, the tariff discussion has really been, the premiers really were the kind of front line of response to Trump. I'm curious, watching that, do you know how you would have reacted if you had been one of those premiers? Is there someone you were watching that you feel had a similar playbook, or would you have done something differently?
I would have eliminated interprovincial trade barriers right away, immediately.
Is that
Stop.
moment gone? Is that moment gone too? Like where you kind of had that Overton window of like, you know what I mean? When Trump was really like freshly implementing these
Shouldn't be
tariffs.
already gone because it means a $200 billion benefit to Canada's economy and Canadians. So I don't know where they figure that that's something that we can just spend. All of them are running huge deficits. No one has actually got their books back in shape. Not one. I don't think there's one province that has done that. Get rid of interprovincial trade barriers. Let's just think of what they're doing when they keep them. They're doing to one another provincially what Trump is doing to Canada internationally.
But isn't
And
that a job for Ottawa?
do it
Shouldn't the Prime
internationally.
Minister call him in? Shouldn't the PM just call him in and say, we've heard some wonderful words over the last few weeks about interprovincial trade. I'm going to have a meeting with everybody. We're going to draft a federal law which will require everybody within 6 months to level up or down or whatever. Not going
Yeah,
to work?
yeah, he should, but they've had 3 meetings so far where they've said that this is really serious. Well, do something.
Yeah, somebody's got to have the whip hand, though, I think.
Yeah, but the provinces, well, you can't tell us what to do. He should say he's doing it, and the provinces should do it. I don't need, you know what? I didn't have to ask the Prime Minister if I was going to take down trade barriers. I said it was the right thing to do. Let's take them down. That's the same thing that Ralph Klein said. We can do this stuff. We just can't accept these phony excuses from people of how they're locked into inaction. They're not. And just to go back, Kate, I think that the tariffs are serious. We shouldn't pretend that they're not serious. But that seriousness requires real action from the premiers, get rid of the trade barriers. And it requires us not to be I kind of felt that when the premiers were saying, we're going to we're not going to buy liquor from red states. That's not the point. We can do much better than that. We can be more thoughtful than that. We can be smarter than that. So let's do that. Let's try to be as smart as we can as Canadians. And let's try and minimize the impact on Canadians, not get into this sort of watch us, we'll match them. We can't match them. They've got a massive economy compared to our economy. So what can we do that's better? We can use the assets that we have to take full advantage of Canada, right? We have all the things that we need. We just need to get out of our own way and get on with doing it. Time is important.
So do you mean like, are you talking about energy? Are you talking like, are you saying that not retaliatory tariffs? Was that what,
I think on retaliatory tariffs, we better be clear. Well, there's a bunch of things that have happened with them, but when Mr. Carney says, I'm going to make sure all the automobile workers are taken care of, what about everybody else? What about the small businesses that are going to be hit? What about the Canadians across the country that will be hit? You have to be really careful with that kind of political comment. What you have to say is, how do we strengthen Canada and use more of our tools? Here's a way. I know this will be the closing. Get rid of interprovincial trade barriers. I mean, there's stuff you can do. Let's do it. We can cut down on our costs. We talk about housing. It takes 3 and 4 years to get a housing permit in Vancouver. That's cost.
I'm aware.
You
Yeah.
know? Okay.
Can I pivot a bit to another thing I like to complain about, which is so over the last couple decades too. The other thing we've seen growing, we've talked about a few trend lines, but one is Metro Vancouver.
Yeah.
And Metro Vancouver at the same time has increasingly complex infrastructure needs and increasing struggles funding them and building them affordably. Are we in a place now in Metro Vancouver where it's time for amalgamation?
Well, I think amalgamation is one of those sort of easy. It sounds easy. It sounds better than it is, right? I actually think if you really want to know what I think we need to.
Yeah, that's why we had you on.
I think I think we need to restructure Canada's constitution. And everyone says, "Oh, don't do that." Don't.
Well, that sounds easy. Yeah.
Well, it's not easy, but it's important. There are 3% of the people lived in cities when the Constitution was written. Today, it's 86 or 87%. We have not. Everything's skewed. We actually had prime ministerial candidates say, "Well, I'm going to deal with development cost charges." I mean, that's not how it works. When I was the mayor of Vancouver, I can remember saying at one point something along this, why can't those stupid guys in Victoria just leave us alone and let us do our job? And then I got to be premier and I said to the cabinet at one point, you know what? We've become the stupid guys in Victoria. It's their job to do that, not ours. So I do think Metro Vancouver is has got to rethink. I'll tell you one thing that I've just thought of this recently, because I know it's just one of those intractable things where a report will be written and people resist. I think we should try maybe having a citizens assembly in Metro Vancouver and ask them some of the real questions about how to deliver services, how they'd like to elect people. And I think we have to demand that in terms of capital projects that they know what they're doing. And there's pretty ample evidence that they do not.
Are you aware of the Citizens Assembly that happened in Saanich and Victoria?
I knew that. I heard about
Yeah.
the Saanich and Victoria, and I think that's smart.
Yeah.
At least it gives people a chance of including them and talking to them about stuff as opposed to talking to ourselves. One of the things that I say to people when they ask me about politics is, most people get up in the morning and the political question they ask themselves, am I having shredded wheat or Rice Krispies? They are not thinking about what BC Liberals are, what BC United is, what the NDP is doing provincially, who's there. I remember when I was elected in Victoria, people thought that we were not sitting when the federal parliament wasn't sitting, but we were when it was. People just are not connected in the same way that all of us in this podcast are connected to this stuff. And our job is to communicate with them. We're serving them. So what about treating them with respect and saying to them, what do you think? Is it right that we have, I think it's 18 or 19 municipalities in the GVRD? They all have their own infrastructure. We've sort of moved away from how you deal with these fundamental utilities. The costs of them are going to be enormous. We talk about affordable housing as if it's one thing over here. If you add 15 or 20% on property tax, that's a direct cost on affordable housing. If you add $1,000 a unit for what they're doing at Iona or what they're doing on the North Shore, those are all costs of housing. And we have to try and find we have to find a better way. And so what's the best way to get new ideas? I think a citizens assembly might be one of them. It wouldn't be any worse than what we've come up with so far.
Well, you hit on the wastewater projects, and the North Shore one's a massive overrun, of course, with a pretty small tax base to support it. But pretty much every major capital project these days, we hear a year or two later that they're 50% more expensive, or even worse than that. Richmond Hospital, I think, has doubled. Yeah. So I know that when you were premier, you had Partnerships BC brought in part to control costs and better delivery, but if you were given the keys to government again, what would be your first step in getting capital projects under control in terms of cost control?
I think going to public-private partnerships is the answer. And I think we should recognize it requires a lot of work at the front by the public service. Public-private partnerships aren't the private sector deciding what they're going to do. It's the public sector deciding what is it we need, how are we going to do it, and from the time you've gone through that procurement process, you've locked in. You're not getting all the scope creep and all those things that add to costs. And I think honestly, the private sector does a better job of thinking long-term about costs than the public sector does. Because the game that gets played, as you say, this is going to be $100 million, I'm just using numbers, $100 million project, and you're stuck with the $100 million. As soon as it's 102, someone's going to write a story that it's already 2% over budget, et cetera. What we have to say is this is what we're buying, and the private sector then has an obligation to deliver it. If they don't deliver it, they pay the price. And if we have to take it back, we get all of the value that they put into doing that. And I think that worked extremely well in places like the Sea to Sky Highway, the Kicking Horse Canyon up north, and we did a number of highways up north. We did a hospital in Vancouver. We did a hospital in the Fraser Valley, and they were on budget. So you have to put that discipline in place. And I think that that's one of the things that a public-private contract really does. It creates a discipline that says private sector can think long-term if they want. They've got to do what they're going to do, but then they have an obligation to deliver, and we've got to shift the risk from the public payer to the private sector builder. And I think that's a healthy thing to do.
Well, I hope it's been a pleasure to have you on to tell us exactly what you think. I hope we'll see some more healthy things to do going forward. Gordon Campbell, thank you so much for joining us again.
Okay, thanks you guys. Good to talk to you.
Keep
up the good work. Even you, Geoff. Geoff, even you. Keep up the good work.
Even me. I know. I try.
That young whippersnapper over there, yeah, Geoff Meggs.
Geoff.
You take care. Thanks, you guys.
Hello. You've reached the Hotel Pacifico Strategy Suite.
Okay. We're pleased to welcome Marko Dekovic to the Strategy Suite today. Hello.
Dekovic.
Oh, did I say Dekovic? Oh man, it's like
It's okay. I'm a Balkan interpreter.
Dekovic. Marko, welcome.
Dekovic.
Dekovic.
you.
I don't know why it
Thank you.
keeps coming out like that. Like, yeah, okay. Welcome,
All
Marko.
good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
yeah.
Thanks for
We're gonna
having
have
me.
to roll
Pleasure.
on a first name basis, you and I.
Absolutely.
Marko is a public affairs professional, former political staffer for the Minister of International Trade and the Asia Pacific Gateway, and a veteran campaigner working on the front lines and the back rooms of pretty much every municipal, provincial, and federal campaign since the early 2000s, the aughts. Is that about right?
That sounds about right.
That sounds about right. Cool. Well, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Did you?
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, no, so I'm going to say I got to listen Battle for BC last week. Mike, you and Richard are still working your magic, making your way.
We are geeking out big
You
time on Sunday mornings.
Which riding is Beaverdale in, Mike? I was surprised to hear that.
I believe it is in the riding of Kelowna, Geoff, and I can regale you with tales of Kingfisher again if you like. But this coming week, we're going to deal with Vancouver, North Shore, Burnaby, and Marco's home turf of the Tri-Cities. We may record that one a little bit earlier than Sunday, so just stay tuned for an Easter surprise over the weekend.
That might be a longer pod, eh? There's a lot of races to tuck into there.
They're all longer than they're supposed to be. So
that's what happens when I'm not there.
So it will be long.
Okay.
As usual.
I'm into it. It sounds good.
I'm looking forward to hearing about Tri-Cities and the big predictions.
That's right.
Yeah. Are you any particular ridings, Marko? Like, while we have Mike here, like anyone you really want to hear a deep dive on?
Tri-Cities, both riding in Tri-Cities. The way Tri-Cities goes.
Or Moody Coquitlam's the one that seems to be the most in question, with all due respect to Ian Black. He's probably got an uphill fight there against the Liberal incumbent.
Yeah, that riding's been a three-way battle for a while, and interesting to see what happens now. It's been kind of rotating back and forth.
Yeah.
All right. Sounds good.
Yeah, we'll do my homework.
Okay, let's pull back up. Let's zoom out on the map, as we love to use as our reference point, and let's talk about Buttongate. So Liberal staffers planted some phony buttons at a Conservative conference, and I think Mark Carney said those staffers have been reassigned. Can I start this say, am I allowed
They've
to
been reassigned to a Laurentian gulag?
They're pulling a vote in Chelsea.
Okay, do I get sent to a gulag if I admit that I thought those buttons were hilarious? Like, is it like kosher to like I'm trying to think the tonight strike out Jenny Byrne. Like, sorry, no, I'm not endorsing the move. I just did get a little chuckle reading some of those buttons.
Corey is a friend of the pod.
Yes.
But
just a note to those who may have missed that point.
Yeah, that little thing. Yeah,
the hypocrisy of
fair.
That stunt is pretty spectacular.
It's huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
It made international headlines. Like it's
really?
Yeah.
I think it just shows that Liberals have gotten so comfortable in Ottawa that, they sit at Darcy's in Chad and forgot that Conservatives still exist. They've been there for 10 years and they forgot that there's a Conservative convention in town and there might be some people listening in.
Well, no, it was a CBC
reporter.
Busted. Well, so like this is what's odd to me. Like everyone I know who in Ottawa is like scared to have a conversation with their window open. Like I was like, what was going on that they were out at the pub, like chuckling about this?
Well, this is a long way from foreign interference. If this is as bad as the slug match gets, I think we're in for a pretty clean match. It's a rounding error, but it caught a lot of coverage, which was actually better than negative coverage for Carney.
These unnamed Liberal backroomers, and we don't know how high up the chain that idea was surfaced to. Who knows? But so they go into this Conservative thing to make them look like a bunch of right-wing kooks, right? That was their intention, right? And they got caught, right? Mm-hmm. But the intention was, oh, look, there's all these pro-America people at the what's it called? The Canadian True North Strong and Free Conference, or used to be the Manning Conference.
Yeah.
So anyway, so they got hoisting their own petard on that one. And that's a bit of a embarrassment for the Liberal campaign, which probably hit a little speed bump along the way, unless they get another embarrassment. 2 days from now or something. It usually takes a pattern to.
Yeah, but Mike, on a scale of 1 to 10, this is about 1.5, isn't it? Yeah, I mean,
I would say, but unless it's a pattern, unless it becomes a narrative of mistakes,
it's a pattern of funny buttons being distributed.
well, or just
We'll look to Kate Hammer for
foibles,
proper.
mistakes,
Yeah.
Signs being
Yeah.
destroyed. Yeah.
signs of
Yeah, yeah.
arrogance.
Yeah.
So
And I think too, like some of the story just is sort of the like how much it shows Ottawa to be a funny closed bubble, prank gone wrong, less than the idea that it's sort of, a real hit to the Carney brand or anything. I mean, I think your point's right, Mike. Like it's a vulnerable space for him. It's that kind of privileged, entitled, assuming they're coming back vibe, but mostly it's funny buttons.
Could I go to a second part of this? It's part of what's driving the news, maybe driving some news, but it's the relationship of liberal candidates with the People's Republic of China, which in the Globe and Mail has been covering as very sinister things. So they daylighted pictures of the person had to be removed from one riding because of ridiculous remarks he said about conservative politicians. Then he was replaced by someone whose resume looks excellent to me, former deputy police chief and so forth. And they've got, years ago pictures of him in formal occasions, same with Carney, meeting with Chinese people or officials of some sort. And this is trying to be driven as a foreign interference thing. It's another one where I think it's grossly overtorqued, personally, because nobody in elected politics is able to know who they're standing and getting photographed with from time to time. Now, these guys may have known this was this community organization, but you're not really in a position to say, I'd like the two guys at the end of the row here to just disappear. And so I think that's one where the buttons were a small thing that turned into sort of a big thing. The Chinese interference thing is a very important issue, but we don't see a lot of evidence of it, despite tremendous efforts on the part of the Globe and Mail. My opinion, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
well, I think
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a point taken, but I think we can look at the last election in Richmond. We know that there's something real there.
Something, yeah.
That where there's smoke, there could be fire, right?
Yeah,
Maybe
well,
not in
there's a
that. Maybe
picture
not
out
in
there
the
of me with
particular.
Trump,
Maybe not in the
you know.
particular instance of that candidate, or in the case of Carney, but definitely it can't sleep on Chinese interference. Not that you are, but it's an issue I think that needs to be in there.
Yeah, well, I agree, but I just think the evidence so far hasn't been persuasive for me, where they shone the light.
Well, you're
So
really letting the Liberal campaign off the hook today, Jeff. Geez, what's going on here?
I know, what's
Yeah,
wrong?
just trying to provide
wasn't it the
unvarnished.
committee that's supposed to be supervising this that actually
Yeah.
had a press conference on it and talked about it and flagged
Yeah.
it and presented some evidence, and it was like a 15-minute story and kind of gone away.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a general problem for conservatives, Marko, where it's tough to get things to stick, on their opponents. Yet sometimes if you're conservative, I imagine it feels like you're covered in Velcro, when something bad goes your way. I mean, am I channeling conservative neurosis here? Like,
Well,
how do people in the conservatives feel?
if conservative leader was not so good at French, of avoiding Quebec, and not sometimes terse with media and all those things, I think there would be a outrage at the conservative leader. And it appears there's a little bit more of a pass on the Liberal side, because some of those things would be just like mortal sins if conservatives did it, and they're not seen as such. I would suggest, based on what I've seen so far.
Yeah, Pierre Poilievre said to a CBC reporter, "Look inside yourself." That might not have spun out too well.
I don't know if he was eating an apple. That might be okay.
A lot of negativity. You got to work on that.
Some piece of produce.
I've got a little pet peeve I'd like to bring up. Is that a number of times in this campaign, Mark Carney has quote unquote suspended the campaign to go back to Ottawa. And it's like, I'm not disputing the fact that it's not a bad idea to go spend a day at the office during these times, but that is campaigning. I mean, he is campaigning from the Prime Minister's office. He has that ability to be prime ministerial, being the Prime Minister during an election campaign, but they're not suspending their campaign. They're still sending out their direct mail letters. There's still candidates are out in the hustings, and he is very much projecting an image to the media that day.
So what precedent do we have for an election where there was something of this magnitude going on, and then that sort of stepping out of that caretaker? Like, can we measure this against something like how frequently he's doing it? Or
Well, sometimes there's natural disasters happening in a campaign. I know that in Christie's case in 2017, she had to go deal with a flood in Cache Creek for a day, which was a pain in the neck. But it's, that stuff can happen. But, Geoff, you'll know that in that period when when the election's over, but you haven't sworn in the cabinet, there's the caretaker, and during the election, there's the caretaker convention. My God, you can't even, oh yeah, you can't even touch the levers of government if you're a political person. But here in this federal campaign, it's like caretaker conventions is thrown out the window. Now, these circumstances may warrant it, but it makes me wonder about the caretaker convention. Like, is it really just a construct of the public servants to get the politicians out of their lives for a couple months?
Well, Marko, I want to hear from you on this, but I have an instinct that, like, in the past, what you're going to see when there were sort of when there were cases where candidates had to step out of the campaign and go back and do some governing. It was more of an episodic type, something happened that no one predicted. This is so unusual, this circumstance where we go into an election where there's kind of this drawn out thing that can erupt or not erupt on any given day. So, and I'm not sort of defending the decision. I'm just saying it's got to be that I can't think of anything like this where there be this kind of regular and this persistent throughout the campaign, a reason to step away and step out of caretaker mode.
Yeah, I can recall. I mean, maybe in the 2008 campaign, there was a global financial crisis. And, I don't think Prime Minister Harper was suspending his campaign at the time.
Yeah.
But at the same time, this time, again, this is probably somewhat unprecedented. We can see why perhaps the campaign may think that it's okay to suspend it because it's already a short campaign. Every day, I think the polls have showed that when the campaign is out there and talking about Trump, it's a good thing, and when they're not talking about Trump, it's a bad thing for the Liberal campaign. So I think they're managing that and acting accordingly. But at the same time, it is unprecedented. The Prime Minister only had 9 days to kind of set things up, even if it is a caretaker government. And so, it is justifiable in some instances to go back and deal with maybe some outstanding things or unforeseen things because things are so dynamic. But I can't think of a situation where similar things have happened, or at least this many times in a campaign, because it's been 3 times.
Are there any voters aside from Mike McDonald who are bothered by it?
Well, there's a few in Ottawa, but I think just to reassure Mike, friends of mine are trying to get a plaque put up in a small park in Steveston. And Parks Canada told him, it's about a human rights activist. Parks Canada told him to call back in May because of the caretaker convention. They can't make any progress on that plaque at the moment. But, I think it is legitimate when President Trump is going 180 degrees over a 36-hour period. You may have to come in and do certain things. What Carney has not done, which was done a lot, especially in 2017, 18, when there were so many disasters back to back. And that was not under the caretaker convention. There was a government in place for the most of it. Mm-hmm. There was a big effort put out by John Horgan to talk to all parties, to convene, call in leaders, call in affected MLAs. The MLAs were given access to the public service to be briefed on what was going on in their ridings and constituencies. So it was hard to argue that it was being used in a partisan way. I mean, it was good politics, but it wasn't being overtly partisan. And I think that's where Carney's at risk here, is that, so I agree that there are certain things that need to be talked about, a certain direction given. But the basic issue for the public service, the onus is on them not to recommend or make decisions. And it's the second part that always worries me, that would fetter or tie the hands of an incoming government. In other words, to come in and say, sorry, under the caretaker convention, we couldn't tell you, but we spent $100 million over here and the cupboard is bare. That's not what should be happening. And I'm not saying that it is, of course, but that's also part of the conversation period. People worry about Carney, but I also worry about the public service.
Well, let's just recap. We have a minority government with a prime minister who's unelected and has no seat, that has not faced Parliament for about 5 months, in the middle of an election, making decisions that are pretty important for the country right now, and that is peak non-caretaker convention mode.
Yeah.
But could you imagine if Conservative government abandoned the country like that in the most historically unprecedented times and just decided to prorogue and call it quits and put us into
good
a
choice of words,
debate.
Marko. I like a
Constitutional scholars will debate this rigorously. And I will tut all along the way.
Anyway,
Well,
don't
is
worry,
this
Mike. The
something?
plaque is not going up.
The
Is
plaque
this
is not
something
going up.
unique though? The plaque is not going up. Sorry, is this something unique though? I mean, is there like does Mark Carney Mark Carney gets to pull this look off because he's kind of the guy who rolled up who
Doesn't get called on it. I mean, no,
yeah, well
it's
because of his resume. Like I'm not defending it.
yeah,
I'm just saying like there's a little bit like, oh, he's probably like if we drew a guy who was, ready to meet this
yeah.
moment, this would he'd look something like it.
I
So
think
he
most
gets
Canadians would probably want him to do what he's doing right now in terms of like dealing with what's on his desk. Arguably, to Jeff's point, I mean, he could be at least making a show of consulting the opposition leaders.
yeah, yeah.
Not that Polyev probably wouldn't take the briefing because they think it's a big trick, but but he could try, Anyways, moving
Yeah.
on.
National
Okay.
Post has been vindicated for not taking security clearance. So
Okay.
We
Okay.
have our one National Post reader, right?
Wait, where did the vindication come from? Wait, what vindication? All right. Are we ready? Can we move on to the clipping? Because we have a clipping this week.
I
Oh,
have a
we're
follow-up
moving to
for Marco
provincial?
very briefly.
Oh,
Just very
okay.
briefly. So on this trade stuff, it would be appropriate to collect information. In other words, to say to CN for example, or people like you, Marco, you're in the global container business.
Mhm.
What do you think is happening? What's your worst case scenario? And I wonder if you've experienced that or whether the business community is hearing from public service in BC or nationally to say, well, how would we simulate the impacts of various scenarios on rail traffic and your business? Is that conversation occurring?
No, we're not seeing any of that conversation occurring. Unfortunately, I mean, we do have the National Supply Chain Office. They're in a caretaker mode, but we are engaging with them sort of on an official level and feeding some information in. But it is, with the latest executive order from Trump on the maritime dominance, as it's called, or make shipping great again, as it's more known, and USTR Section 301 hearings. Those two things have potential to significantly impact the flow of trade and containers throughout the country on both coasts. And it's basically a non-issue. Nobody's talking about it. And that has a lot more impact than the current set of tariffs that are in place. And it's unsettling because, again, as we know, Trump administration can switch on a dime, and the current executive order can mean ultimately kind of what a net's net zero, maybe not a big impact at all. It can potentially completely devastate the gateway, if you will, that discretionary cargo that we capture through gateway that's U.S. destined, or it can actually drive some new traffic through Canadian ports that we haven't said before. It all depends how it's implemented. Our understanding is really that they're going to announce kind of how it's implemented sometime April 17th onward. So we're very much kind of on pins and needles and watching that, but that it could potentially have very significant impacts, and nobody's talking about it. And
Yeah, this is what we got to move on. But I would expect the incoming prime minister, whoever that is, to say, okay, show us what you've got from every sector of industry that's affected by the supply chain. I want to hear what the options are, how bad it could be this way, that way, the other way, and what instruction we should give. And that's where shutting down is not good news. However, hopefully we'll soon see what they've got.
All right. Are we ready for our clipping? Our clipping this week comes from Ian Bailey, writing in the Globe and Mail about MLA pay, a can of worms that was opened up by Conservative leader John Rustad. I'll read directly from it. BC Conservative leader John Rustad says salaries should be raised for politicians in this province to attract talented candidates who would otherwise make more money in other pursuits. Quote, I'll put it in very crude terms. You pay peanuts, you get monkeys. He said, Rustad said Thursday in an interview at the Conservative Canada Strong and Free Network conference. It's a
Colorful
pleasure to
quote.
read that quote. Yeah.
Could be
That
quote of
is-
the week, yeah.
I was like, but I had a minute of like, do monkeys eat peanuts? But anyway, it's
So Farnworth jumps on it and tries to make
Just bats it
some
down.
hay on it, and
yeah.
and so he's Rustad supporting the MLA pay freeze that's been brought in now. And I think Rustad's calling for an independent review of MLA salaries. But I mean, Rustad's, I would say, right and wrong on this. I think he's right that, the salary level needs to be there so that good people run. But, Gordon Campbell's right too. Like you don't do it for the remuneration, you do it for other reasons.
I would say Can I add a little like just a curlicue to that? Because I think we say good people and that's part of it. But there's this other thing I think, and I think John Russett did make this point. Like there's an age piece that's like if you're, if you're kind of mid-career or if you're, raising a family, like your ability to take a pay cut is like probably not there for most of us, right? And I think it's also that it's like good people and also good people of sort of a certain kind of, I'm going to say kind of 35 to 55.
The people can't afford you, Kate. We can't afford you.
I'm saying more my age demographic. I mean, I can't afford myself right now. It's hard to be middle-aged right now with kids. And that's what I mean. Like, and that's a big omission from the voices around the table. So it kind of bugs me because I feel like there's this kind of like elitist undertone sometimes to saying good people. And it's like, not necessarily that. It's sort of more of it's more than that. Yeah. Yeah. It's representation. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Private sector viewpoint, Marko, what do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree with Kate. I think, I support pay more for elected officials. If you consider the budgets they're in charge of, and if you were a CEO in the private sector and the budgets you're managing, they're terribly underpaid people. And so I think the pay should reflect responsibilities the individuals have. And I would also advocate for, I personally believe we should be paying significant wages increases to first responders, to teachers, to nurses. There's certain key, as a society, we need to determine which professions are so key to stability and effectiveness of our society, and we should be paying them accordingly and put priorities on that and therefore attract people. But to Kate's point, also some people will just, if we want to have a diverse representation in the House, you either right now the pay either somebody fresh out of school or young person or perhaps somebody near retirement is basically the only one who can afford to live in Vancouver and run for office.
Yeah.
Well, I want to talk about the politics of it briefly. This was a political gift from Rustad to the NDP, but one that they took awfully quickly. There's nothing more divisive in a caucus than debates over pension and all that kind of thing. And the pay given to an MLA without other adjustments for other service they're rendering is equivalent to a nurse, frankly, or a first responder who's getting a bit of overtime. It's not terrible, but it's not what you would expect. So I hope that they do move really to an independent review that brings in the left right before the election so people know what they're running for. We don't have to have this discussion periodically because this was a pretty quiet week for the NDP administration, and they snapped out a gotcha bill on the Conservatives right in what would otherwise be an even quieter week. So anyway, it's all gone by. Surprising. Also, Dallas Brody was quick to give a slap to John Rustad on this front. So he's got that problem to contend with still.
Well, I will say one thing for Dallas Brody is that in the Bailey piece or somewhere I read that every NDP MLA gets top-up pay. Mm-hmm. Through one, they were the cabinet, parliamentary secretary, you name it, assistant dog catcher to the caucus. They all get some top-up pay.
There's one missing. I think it's Alman. Yeah, there's one missing.
And about 11.
Point is correct, General.
11 of the Conservatives do. Both Greens get top-up pay. Like the leader of the two-member caucus gets paid like a leader. And then the three, Dallas Brody and her two colleagues who left the Conservative, they have not formed a party, so they don't get the extras, And so to their credit so far, they haven't cost the taxpayers any more money. But yeah, you just become a party of two, and all of a sudden you get a leader salary, you get a whip salary, you get more staff, all that stuff. So there's so many it's not just the MLA salary, it's all the little extras that come along the way.
Yeah. Can we talk about just as like a point of contrast, though? It was interesting to me, like as a cabinet member in BC and in most of the provinces, like just for context too, like I did a quick scan of the other provinces and we're near the top but fairly analogous to Alberta and Ontario. There's no big differences. Mm-hmm. But so a cabinet minister in any of those provinces is still going to be making less than a backbencher federally. And you just think of the volume of work that goes into holding, like, let's say health, right? Like it's just, it's tough. And I don't want to sound like I'm saying, one group's overpaid and everything else in the politics of this.
Well, and the electeds the cabinet ministers make a lot less than the deputy minister.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But fair. That's life, that's just the way it is.
Okay, that's life.
I don't think that will ever change.
Okay.
because you got the deputy ministers are basically being paid what the market will bear, and nobody wants to give raises to politicians. When it comes down to it.
So
Yeah.
politics hitting life.
Rob Shaw,
Yeah,
who's
yeah.
writes reports for Czech, did quite a critical piece in Business of Vancouver. I think it was Business of Vancouver, maybe it was the Orca, about Penny Ballum, who was appointed to in this restructuring of the health authorities, that she cost the government something like $400,000 or $1.4 million and whatever we got to show for it. If you looked deeper, that was her salary times 4 years. She was at a deputy salary plus some consulting fees on top of that. That's my guess. I haven't dug into it or spoken to her. But, it's what you would pay a deputy at a senior level ministerially to run that kind of a show. And in the private sector, they would laugh in your face if you offered them that much money and say, are you kidding me? I can get 1.2 doing that for 1 year.
Yeah.
So, that's the reality check that a lot of voters don't have.
Yeah, I should say that deputy ministers in BC, while they're paid more than their cabinet minister, they're actually tend to be paid a lot less than health authority executives, Crown Corporation executives, and peers in the private sector. So BC's public sector senior management actually are pretty good value. But the politicians are just like, well, you want to be a politician, you have to take your lumps. That's just the way it is.
Well, running a large Crown Corporation, it's quite conceivable that you would have a search for a CEO position and not have any applicants that were suitably experienced. There'd be many who will soon be experienced and brilliant people, no doubt. But the private sector compensation for some of those large corporations is far higher than it is in the public sector.
But in the public sector, you don't have a quarterly shareholder report.
True.
Yeah. So can I pick up on one more comment too Rusted made in this Ian Bailey piece, or that Ian Bailey picked up on in this piece that Rusted said in that same interview, and it's about the education system, and I'll just read it quickly. Rusted also called on Conservatives to try and influence educational policy. Quote, "The left is controlling our education system. They're indoctrinating our kids." Just Marko, while we have you here, I'm wondering how pervasive is this view that there's indoctrination within the education system?
Well, I can't speak for, the movement or anything like that. All I can say is that all 3 of my kids are in independent Catholic schools.
For that
Just
reason.
leave it at that.
Yeah.
Mic drop.
Yeah.
Yeah. And okay, that's I thought that was kind of interesting. And again, like my kids are in public school, and I'm generally pretty happy with what they're coming across.
I went to public school. My wife went to public school. I think over time, the focus of public school has evolved and changed. And in fact, our oldest one that started public school, and we moved them into independent school because it was just not reflective of what we believed should be happening in schools.
Is there anything in particular? Was there an event or something that happened? Like, just help me understand.
There's nothing specific, but it was, just a general trend, and we just didn't think that that's where our kids, or especially our oldest one at the time, was. It didn't feel safe. It didn't feel welcoming, and it just wasn't the right fit for us.
Right. Yeah, I come from Ontario, where when the shift people do is they stay within the public system, they go to the Catholic system.
But it's very different in Ontario because publicly funded, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so, because I've had versions of this conversation, like back when I was in Ontario, right? We're sort of trying to think of an example. I remember someone was sort of alarmed when Elf got shown at the Christmas holidays to like a really young classroom, and they just felt it wasn't age appropriate, and they booted them to the Catholic system. But Ontario has 4 public education systems, so we can talk about the inefficiency of that another time.
But I think Rustad's rhetoric, I think there's something there to it in terms of people who are concerned about the public school system. But when he says things like they're indoctrinating our kids, the left is controlling our education system, it does sound a little fringy, the way that is reported. So, I think it scares moderates.
I think the statement is probably too aggressive, and maybe he was. I assume he was saying that in an audience in Ottawa at the Strong and Free conference. So I'm just throwing some red meat.
His inside voice got reported.
His inside voice.
Actually, I think it is his outside voice. Actually.
Yeah.
So.
I hate when reporters pick up on your inside
I think
voice.
with Rustad, he's demonstrated he kind of has the same voice inside and outside.
Yes,
Yeah, so
I think so.
So we should touch on, before we wrap up the provincial politics part, just that Brenda Bailey column in Von Palmer in the past week. And Vaughn's been, this is not the first time Vaughn's taken her on about some of her statements about the budget. This one was with regard to the fallout of the carbon tax being lifted. Peter Millibar is doing a pretty effective job as critic in holding her feet to the fire. And she's a new minister. This is her first rodeo as finance minister this budget year. So I think she's having trouble, finding her footing a little bit. We'll have to see whether she settles down or settles into the role, maybe a better way to put it. I don't know, what did Geoff, did you catch that piece?
Well, I'm impressed that she does as well as she has with so few cards to play.
Yeah.
I mean, to take out the carbon tax, there hasn't been, to be fair to her and to Vaughan, there hasn't been an explanation of what that's going to mean for the budget. And, they're in public sector bargaining. There's been very little coverage of that. One thing that we're seeing, in my view, and this is not trying to deflect to a different topic, because we talk about it a lot, the number of reporters is so low that the Trump issue is sucking all the oxygen out of the room. And what would normally, or even 10 years ago, have been 5 or 6 reporters on the budget is 2. I mean, the budget coverage is largely from Vaughan, who's a columnist, who's, has his opinions and advances them very ably. But on the government side, it must be welcome that so little coverage is happening in the legislature, because this, in the absence of the Trump thing, and going back to Gordon Campbell's comments, in the absence of this controversy, the budget would be an enormous story, in my opinion, and it's not. This is an exception to the rule. So Brenda Bailey's trying to say, yeah, we had 2 downgrades. Downgrades happen. Yes, I lost the billions of dollars from over here. Yes, I'm facing this contingency from Trump, and I got a contingency from public sector bargaining. So she's, playing a very, very poor hand as best she can. I think that's what's going on here.
Right.
Maybe
I definitely agree with Geoff on that, because I had a chance of seeing Mr. Bailey. I thought she's like a shining star in that cabinet. I thought she was very good at connecting with the business community. I saw her at a couple of board trade events, and just unfortunately, she's been, I think, dealt this hand that now she has to play, because going into it, nobody kind of expected some of these things to happen, including the speed and what has happened with the all of a sudden newfound glory of removing the carbon tax. That's a huge hole in the budget that she now has to kind of polish.
Well, I think it's maybe not necessarily bad luck, but it's her situation where she's got a tough critic. And
one of the few experienced front benchers there.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a lot of rookies in that opposition benches, but she got stuck with the guy who knows the legislature inside out. So she won't get any days off from Peter Millibar, that's for sure.
He was trouncing or trying to trounce Josie Osborne with the Kamloops Cancer Center, which is something that was a difficulty I had to manage all the way through the time I was in Victoria, because it does not include a PET scan. So this is a local issue that has, big political consequences, because they've been counting the days since they got a commitment from John Horgan to have a cancer center. And now Millibar, I thought very deftly said, but it's not a real cancer center, because they're making us drive to Kelowna for this scan. And, that will be as important in Kamloops, I think, as
what kind of scan was that they're missing?
PET
PET
scan.
scan. Positron,
PET.
electron.
Oh, I thought like you can bring your dogs and cats.
No.
No, they're not sending veterinary.
Thinking, what are they doing in Kamloops? Don't they have vets? Where's Terry Lake? Does he do PET scans?
It's not an economy measure.
Yeah. Positron emission tomography.
Learn something every day.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway,
Learning. The more you know. Woo. Yeah. All right. Let's, Marko, come grab a drink with us.
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the minibar.
I will raise a glass to, if this is breaking news, and in a way, it'll be old news by the time you hear this pod, to Ed Fast, outgoing member of Parliament, who today endorsed Mike DeYoung in his independent bid for Abbotsford South Langley. And I raise the glass for this reason. he probably did it with some trepidation because when you belong to a team for a lot of years, it's tough to go against the party and endorse someone outside of the family. And the circumstances are such in his writing, he felt he had to do it. Obviously, I guess that's why I assume so. But he did make his voice heard, and this is the fallout and the consequences of decisions made on that as part of that nomination process. That we'll see what happens. I mean, I'm Richard Zussman on the weekend said shame on me for believing the independents might win a
I
seat in the
know.
provincial election.
I disagreed a bit too with his
And
assessment.
shame on me,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
fool me once, fool me twice,
Fool me
whatever
twice.
that
I know. I
said.
remember. Yeah.
So I mean, that's been ringing in my ear, thinking like, yeah, I'm not sure can Mike win? I don't know. Maybe they had
But they
fasting.
really changed the dynamics in the writing. Like it's like, yeah, you can say something like that provincial election. Like
It helps Mike's momentum, at least on the Abbotsford side of the writing. But there's a lot of Langley in that writing. I don't know if anyone in Langley's even following the plot on all this. But
yeah.
anyways, there you go, Ed. Raise my glass.
There you go. Here. Geoff.
Well, I'm going to raise my glass to a conservative too, because I've been infuriated by the coverage generated by I guess it was initially a Polara poll or something pretty modest thing about separatism in the West, and that Canada would splinter if the Liberals got elected. So there's now been a third poll. I think it's by Preston Manning weighed in, of course, and so on. But for my understanding of Alberta politics, I always stick with Jason Kenney. And I was pleased to see him say recently that, I think a few days ago, I don't think any political leader should ever let the tail wag the dog, let the small minority dominate the agenda for the 10 or 15% of Albertans who are hardcore separatists. He said, don't underestimate the issues and the frustrations in Western Canada, which I think is reasonable. But I do think that this has been a really kind of a destructive debate stirred up from almost nowhere. And I was glad to see Jason Kenney call it. So I'm raising a glass to him.
All right. Marko.
Well, I was going to take a shot at Ed Fast, but since Mike
you should take a shot.
A different opinion, but
It's
no,
allowed.
Counter,
allowed.
dude, go for it.
Yeah, we do it. Yeah.
I was going to do a double shot at Corey Tenike and Ed Fast, and I maybe old school kind of Politico, but I kind of believe in the old saying, you don't shit where you eat, and I think both of those guys did that, and I don't think. I worked adjacent to Minister Fast, and generally very good guy, very committed. I can see where he's coming from. I don't necessarily disagree that everything. I agree with him that things in Abbotsford didn't necessarily go how they should. But if he, as an outgoing MP and as a relevant political figure, he should have then made sure that doesn't happen in his backyard, right? So I think the fact that did happen in his backyard more speaks for his kind of level of organization, presence, and relevance in the party. That happened in his backyard under the circumstances, and to come 13 days before E-Day with something like that, not helpful. I like Mike DeYoung. I think it's reasonable to so, but in the kind of traditional political world, you don't do that 13 days before an election, because in the end, there's I don't see the win for anybody who kind of plays in that.
Well, it's possible that two things are right. You shouldn't do that, but also somebody should have managed the process a lot better. So that 100%. Didn't happen, right?
100%. Yeah.
Then we get a shot in a glass. All right. I hate to break this like conservative theme. Sorry. I mean, what I wanted to do was actually raise a glass, and I've been meaning to do this for a while. So anyway, and it does pick up on the theme, some of the discussion we've been having just about infrastructure costs, Metro Vancouver, because I wanted to raise my glass to Movement. It's a group that's actually pulling together rider advocacy, and they've been speaking of things we're not talking about. TransLeak's got to get their investment plan sorted by the end of the month. I'm a transit rider, like through and through. And they've been fighting to get to fight back the cuts on the bus routes. So and just to say too, like they're kind of this amazing story, because they were like last year started with like one person and tens of thousands of dollars, and now they've amassed huge lists and some real influence in about a year. So they're doing great work. So my glass is raised to Movement and the team there.
Yeah, very effective.
Yeah, they're smart. They're awesome. Okay. That's it. That's another episode. I want to thank our guest Gordon Campbell for joining us, and our guest in the strategy suite, Marko Dekovic, and our presenting sponsor, TELUS and Fortis BC. We will see you next week, guests. BC, you can never leave.
Checkout time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.